been here before, lying next to someone or scrolling through your phone alone at midnight, with that quiet, corrosive thought creeping in. What if there's someone better? Not because anything is terribly wrong, just because nothing feels quite right enough. Just because the feeling that was once electric has gone ordinary. Just because somewhere out there behind the next profile, the next conversation, the next beginning, something more complete might be waiting. You don't say it out loud, but you think it. And then you feel guilty for thinking it. And then you think it again. That thought is not a personality flaw. It is not proof that you haven't found the right person yet. It is a symptom, and it's been carefully manufactured. Here is the real diagnosis. You have been trained to consume people, not by accident and not by your own moral failure, but by a culture that turned human connection into a product category. The same logic that makes you scroll past a show after 20 seconds, upgrade your phone before it breaks, and abandon a restaurant the moment the reviews drop. That same logic is now running your love life. You were handed a consumer mindset and told to go build intimacy with it, and you're wondering why nothing lasts. The twist is this. The problem is not who you're choosing. It's how you're choosing. It's the framework itself. The invisible assumption that relationships should feel effortless, that difficulty signals incompatibility, that somewhere out there is a person who won't require the hard work this one does. That assumption doesn't protect you from the wrong relationship. It guarantees you'll never survive a right one. Zygmunt Bauman spent decades watching modernity do something unprecedented to human bonds. He called it liquid love, a world where everything solid dissolves, where permanence becomes suspicious, where commitment looks like a trap rather than a foundation. Bauman wasn't romanticizing the past. He was diagnosing the present with the precision of someone who understood exactly what we were losing and why we kept smiling while we lost it. By the end of this video, you will understand why your relationships keep ending at the same point, why connection feels simultaneously abundant and hollow, and why the freedom you think you're protecting is the very thing destroying your capacity for love. But I want to warn you, what's coming will not be comfortable. It will name things you've been carefully not naming, and it will ask something of you that consumer culture has spent years convincing you is unnecessary. That discomfort is not a side effect, it is the point. You are not looking for a relationship. You are looking for the feeling of possibility. And that is not the same thing. There's a difference between wanting to love someone and wanting to keep your options open while being close enough to someone that loneliness doesn't ache too loudly. Most people living inside liquid love have never examined which one they're actually doing. They assume the desire for connection is enough. It isn't. Desire without commitment is just appetite. And appetite, left unchecked, consumes everything without being satisfied by anything. Bauman saw this clearly. The same architecture that makes markets efficient, infinite choice, low switching costs, constant comparison, was imported wholesale into the domain of human relationships. Dating apps didn't invent this logic, they perfected it. They took the consumer mindset and gave it a frictionless interface. Now you can browse human beings the way you browse a catalog, and the catalog never ends, and that is precisely the problem. Here is what infinite choice does to the human mind. It doesn't liberate you. It paralyzes you. Psychologists call it the paradox of choice. The more options available, the less satisfied you are with any single one. But Bauman understood something deeper than the psychological mechanism. He understood the moral consequence. When people become options, they stop being people. When someone can be replaced with a swipe, your brain, quietly, unconsciously, stops treating them as irreplaceable. And intimacy requires irreplaceability. It requires the radical decision that this person, with all their inconvenient specificities, is worth more than the frictionless fantasy behind the next profile. You've felt this. You've been mid-conversation with someone genuinely interesting and felt your attention drift. Not to anything better, just to the possibility of better. That drift is not boredom. It is the consumer reflex. It is the trained inability to be fully present with what is real, because the simulation of something more perfect is always one tap away. The cruelest part is that apps don't just change how you meet people. They change how you experience the person you're already with. When you know the alternative is always available, investment feels optional. Why go deep when you can go wide? Why work through a difficult conversation when you could just open the app again and feel the clean dopamine hit of someone new finding you interesting? The app doesn't just give you options, it trains you to need them, to feel that closing them is loss rather than focus. Bauman called this the collector's mentality applied to human beings. You accumulate connections the way someone accumulates things, for the comfort of having them, not the depth of using them. 500 contacts, dozens of matches, a handful of almost relationships that never quite solidified, and underneath all of it, a hunger that none of it touches. That hunger has a name, and it lives in the place you've been most carefully avoiding. In the next part, we'll go there, to the belief that has been quietly sabotaging every relationship before it even had a chance to become real. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. There is no right person. There never was. And the belief that there is has ended more relationships than betrayal ever could. This is the story you were sold. Somewhere out there is someone whose flaws you can tolerate, whose presence doesn't require effort, whose love arrives fully formed and stays that way. Someone who makes you feel the way the beginning always feels, electric, certain, uncomplicated. You just have to keep looking until you find them. And if what you have stops feeling like that, it means you haven't found them yet. That story is not romantic. It is a mechanism of avoidance dressed in the language of hope. Bauman was precise about this. Liquid modernity doesn't just change how we relate. It changes what we believe we deserve. Consumer culture promises personalization at scale, the perfect product, tailored to your exact specifications, available on demand. That promise bleeds into how you think about people. Somewhere the logic goes, there is a person optimized for you. And your job is not to build something. It is to find it. To locate the right match, the way you'd locate the right apartment or the right streaming subscription. You are a customer. Love is the product. Difficulty is a defect. So you leave. Not because anything catastrophic happened. Not because the person beside you is cruel or broken or wrong. You leave because the feeling shifted. Because the effortlessness of the beginning gave way to the work of the middle. Because they revealed an inconvenient truth about themselves or about you. And suddenly the catalogue felt more appealing than the commitment. You've done this, or it's been done to you. Maybe both. Here is what Bauman understood that the myth refuses to acknowledge. Every relationship has phases. The initial intensity, what he called the intoxication of possibility, is neurochemical, not spiritual. It fades by design. It was never meant to be the foundation. It was meant to be the invitation. What comes after the invitation is the actual relationship, the negotiation of two imperfect people choosing each other through boredom, conflict, and the slow revelation of who they really are. That is not a sign that something went wrong. That is where love actually lives. But if you believe in the myth of the right person, you will never reach that place. You will exit every relationship at exactly the moment it asks something real of you. You will call it incompatibility. You will call it growth. You will call it knowing your worth. And you will return to the catalogue, convinced that next time will be different. not realizing that you are the variable that hasn't changed. The myth protects you from one thing above everything else: vulnerability. Real intimacy requires letting someone see you in your difficulty, your pettiness, your fear, and staying anyway. The myth of the right person promises a love that never requires that exposure, a love that feels safe because it never goes deep enough to be dangerous. But safety and intimacy are not the same thing. And you already know that, because you've been safe for years and you're still hungry. What you haven't examined yet is what that hunger is actually costing you. Not in relationships lost, but in the freedom you told yourself you were protecting. That's where we're going next. You believe commitment shrinks you. That choosing one person fully, closing the doors, deleting the apps, betting everything on one imperfect human being, is a kind of surrender, a narrowing, the responsible death of possibility. That belief feels like wisdom. It is not. It is the most sophisticated trap consumer culture ever built. Bauman identified something essential about liquid modernity. It doesn't just celebrate freedom, it pathologizes its absence. In a world built on flexibility, permanence looks like failure. Staying looks like settling. Commitment looks like a person who ran out of options, or worse, a person too afraid to keep looking. The culture doesn't have to tell you this directly. It tells you through every algorithm, every app design, every romantic comedy where the protagonist leaves the stable relationship for the electric stranger. The message is ambient and constant. The person who commits early is the person who gave up. So you don't commit. You keep things loose, ambiguous. You stay in relationships that have no name, no future, no real weight, because weight feels like a cage. You tell yourself you're protecting your freedom, but look at what that freedom has produced. You are free to swipe endlessly and choose no one. Free to maintain 5 connections that never deepen into one. Free to leave before anything gets difficult and call it self-respect. Free to optimize and compare and curate, and arrive, somehow, more alone than ever. That is not freedom. That is the illusion of freedom wrapped around a profound incapacity for risk. Bauman made a distinction that cuts through this cleanly. He separated security from freedom and argued that liquid modernity convinced us they were opposites, when in truth, without a foundation of security, freedom becomes unbearable. A person with no anchor doesn't float freely. They drift. And drifting feels like motion, but it arrives nowhere. You've been moving for years. Look at where you are. Real commitment is not the end of possibility. It is the condition for a specific kind of possibility. The kind that only opens when 2 people stop auditing each other and start building. The depth you claim to want. The intimacy that feels missing. The sense of being truly known by another person. None of that is available in a relationship you're keeping 1 foot out of. It requires full entry. It requires the willingness to be changed by someone, which means the willingness to be vulnerable to them, which means accepting that they can hurt you in ways a stranger never could. That is the cost, not of the wrong relationship, of any real one. What you've been calling freedom is the refusal to pay that cost, and you've been paying a different price instead, in the slow accumulation of connections that never became anything. In the loneliness you can't quite explain to people who can see how social you are. In the hunger that follows you from person to person, like a shadow you've stopped trying to name. That shadow has a shape. And in the next part, we're going to look at it directly, at the particular kind of loneliness that only exists inside a life full of people. You are not lonely because you are alone. You are lonely because you have never allowed anyone close enough to actually know you. There is a specific kind of emptiness that belongs exclusively to people with full social lives. You know it. It arrives after a party where you talked to everyone and connected with no one. It arrives after a night with someone who found you attractive and engaging and still left you feeling invisible. It arrives in the middle of a conversation where everything you say lands perfectly and nothing you mean gets through. You perform connection constantly. You almost never experience it. This is not a personal failure. It is the logical outcome of liquid love at scale. Bauman described modern society as one of the loneliest in human history, not despite its connectivity, but because of it. The proliferation of connections doesn't dilute loneliness, it industrializes it. When connection is abundant and cheap, depth becomes unnecessary. You learn to navigate surfaces with extraordinary skill. You become fluent in the language of intimacy without ever speaking it. The right vulnerability at the right moment, the carefully calibrated reveal, the emotional gesture that costs nothing and signals everything. You get very good at feeling close to people. You never actually get close. The difference between being known and being consumed is this. Consumption is pleasurable for the consumer and leaves the consumed unchanged. Being known is uncomfortable for both parties. It requires that you show what you usually edit out and that you stay present while someone else does the same. It is slow. It is inconvenient. It resists the frictionless efficiency that liquid modernity demands of everything. So you consume and are consumed. You collect impressions of people and leave impressions of yourself. And at the end of all of it, there is a version of you that almost no one has actually seen. Not because you've been dishonest, but because you've been strategic. Because you learned early that presenting the right version of yourself keeps people close, and showing the real one risks driving them away. That logic made sense as a survival mechanism. As a way of living, it is suffocating. Bauman was unsparing about this. The hunger for connection that consumer society produces cannot be fed by consumer society's solutions. More matches do not cure the ache. More followers do not make you feel seen. More options do not produce the specific relief of being chosen, fully, with knowledge of your flaws, and choosing back with the same completeness. That exchange is what you're actually starving for. And it is the one thing the liquid world cannot deliver on demand, because it cannot be delivered on demand. It has to be built. Slowly, at considerable risk. The risk is not that the other person will leave. The risk is that they will stay and see you, all of you. And you will have to decide whether the person they're seeing is someone you can live with. Most people never get there. Not because they chose wrong. Because they left before the seeing could begin. You've been leaving, maybe for years, and underneath every exit, there has been something you were protecting, something you haven't fully looked at yet. In the next part, we confront it directly. What solid love actually demands, and why part of you has been refusing to pay it. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. You already know what you're supposed to do. That's not the problem. The problem is that you know, and you still don't do it. That gap between knowing and doing is not laziness. It is fear wearing the costume of wisdom. Bauman's concept of solid love is not complicated. It is simply the decision to treat another human being as a person rather than a product, to stop auditing them against a fantasy and start building something with the flawed, specific, inconvenient reality of who they are. To choose, consciously, repeatedly, on the days it doesn't feel good, to stay and work rather than leave and search. That's it. It sounds simple because it is simple. It is also one of the hardest things a person conditioned by liquid modernity will ever attempt. Here is what it actually requires. It requires that you tolerate the death of the beginning. That electric, weightless feeling that arrives in the first weeks, the one you've been chasing by starting over, is not love. It is the neurochemical response to novelty and uncertainty. It fades in every relationship without exception, because certainty replaces uncertainty and familiarity replaces novelty. That fading is not loss. It is the clearing of the ground where something real can be built. But if you've been using that feeling as your measure of whether a relationship is working, you will leave every single time it dims, which means you will leave every single time love becomes possible. It requires that you learn to fight, not to win, to repair. Conflict in a relationship is not evidence of incompatibility. It is evidence of two people with different interiors trying to share a life. The liquid response to conflict is exit, ghosting, stonewalling, the clean escape that protects you from the discomfort of resolution. The solid response is to stay in the room, to say the hard thing, to hear the hard thing back, to come out the other side knowing each other more completely than you did before. That process is ugly and humbling and absolutely necessary. Every avoided conflict is a wall between you and the person you claim to want to know. It requires vulnerability that has no guarantee. You cannot know in advance that showing yourself fully, your fears, your failures, your particular brand of broken, will be met with acceptance. That is precisely what makes it vulnerability and not performance. Consumer culture promises optimized outcomes. Love does not. You risk being seen and rejected. You risk being known and left. That risk cannot be engineered away. It can only be accepted or avoided. And you already know what avoidance costs. It requires that you choose the same person past the point where choosing feels exciting. Passion is involuntary chemistry. Love is a decision, made on ordinary Tuesdays, in the middle of arguments that feel circular, during stretches of routine so quiet they make you wonder if something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. That is what stability feels like to a person who was trained on intensity. Stillness is not death. It is the texture of something that has lasted. Bauman called this the transformation from the liquid to the solid, not a retreat from freedom, but its mature expression. The freedom to go deep rather than wide. The freedom to be known rather than admired. The freedom that only becomes available when you stop running. You've read all of this. You've recognized yourself somewhere in it. The final question isn't whether you understand it. It's whether you're willing to do it, and what it will cost you if you don't. Everything you've heard in this video points to one moment, not a revelation, a decision. And decisions are harder than revelations because revelations cost nothing. You can be moved by an idea and walk away unchanged. The decision is where most people quietly turn back. Here is the hardest truth of everything said here. You are not a victim of liquid modernity. You are its willing participant. The apps didn't force themselves onto your phone. The half-commitments didn't happen to you. The exits, the ones you called growth, incompatibility, knowing your worth, those were choices made by you, repeated by you, protected by a story sophisticated enough that you rarely had to examine it directly. Bauman diagnosed the culture, but the culture doesn't swipe. You do. That is not an accusation. It is the only place from which change is actually possible, because as long as the problem is out there, in the apps, in the culture, in the generation, in the string of people who weren't quite right, you are powerless. You are a consumer in a broken market, waiting for better products. But the moment you locate the problem in here, in the choices you've been making and the fears those choices have been protecting, something shifts. You are no longer waiting, you are deciding. The decision Bauman points toward is not romantic. It will not feel like the beginning of a relationship feels. It will feel like closing a door and standing in a room that is smaller than you're used to, with a person who is imperfect in ways you've catalogued carefully, in a silence that used to send you reaching for your phone. It will feel, at first, like loss. That feeling is lying to you. What solid love asks is not that you find someone worthy of permanence. It asks that you become someone capable of it, that you retire the consumer reflex, the constant audit, the open portfolio, the exit strategy held quietly in reserve, that you choose one direction and go deep instead of wide, that you let yourself be changed by another person, which is the thing you've been most carefully preventing, because being changed means you were never as completely alone as you told yourself. You can have 100 options, or you can have one real thing, rarely both. The swipe that matters is not the one that finds the right person. It is the one where you close the app, not because you found perfection, but because you've decided that perfection was never the point. That the person in front of you, imperfect and specific and real, is worth the full weight of your presence. That decision will not be celebrated by the culture you live in. It will look, from the outside, like settling. It is the opposite. It is the only genuinely radical act available to someone who has been conditioned since adolescence to treat love as a market. If something in this video named something you've been carrying without language, leave it in the comments. Not as confession, but as recognition. The moment you can name a pattern, you are no longer entirely inside it. And if you're ready to go further, to understand not just what liquid love does to your relationships, but what it does to your sense of self, your identity, your capacity to know who you even are underneath the performance, the next video is waiting. Don't stop here. The most important part of what we're examining hasn't been said yet.